Hello and welcome to Transforming Tomorrow, the podcast from the Pentland Centre for Sustainability in Business here at Lancaster University Management School. I'm Paul Turner.
And I'm Professor Jan Babington.
You're alive, Jan. You're alive.
You found me again.
Yes. We left listeners on a cliffhanger at the end of the last episode as you were stranded somewhere in the wilderness of Cumbria, but we found you again.
Yes, I found my way home. I'm very pleased to be home, and we've got a big studio with us today.
Yes, it's a packed studio. We've got more guests in this studio today than we've ever had for a single podcast before, because we're joined by what I'm going to call a crash of economists. I don't know what the collective noun for economists is, but I've decided on crash. So we have a crash of economists with us. We have Professor Dakshina De Silva, Dr. Anita Schiller, and Dr. Aurelie Slechten. Hello to all of you.
Hello.
Hello. Hello.
And they're going to be talking to us today, Jan, about pollution and economics of pollution.
And I suppose for our listeners, you've heard quite a few accountants, and fantastic though accountants are, our big brothers and big sisters are the economists. And so we look at very similar things, but we do it on a different scale. So whereas I might be interested in an organisation, economists are interested in regions, economies, the whole of the globe itself and how it economically functions. So it's a really nice nesting of expertise.
And I'm told they look down upon you.
That is true and probably fair. But, oh no, there'll be accountants listening to this. I'm in so much trouble.
Yes, you didn't realise then, but by praising economists, you've actually just insulted all the accountants among our listenership.
Yeah, they understand what the game is.
You just tried to butter up the economists. Is that what you're essentially doing? So, a quick introductions then. If you just like to introduce yourselves and what your background is, how you've ended up stuck in this studio with myself and Jen. We'll start with you, Aurelie.
My name is Aurelie. I studied in Belgium and then I came to Lancaster. My main research interest is environmental economics, which means that I'm looking at the interaction between economy and environment. And in particular, I'm very interested at understanding what are the policies that we can put in place to tackle climate change.
And Anita?
My name is Anita Schiller, and I originally moved from Korea, and then I moved to United States. So before moving to Lancaster, I used to be in Texas. That's where I studied in the wind energy and the wind science and engineering, and that was my background. And I also these days, I do research on the environmental and natural resource economics, and I also have research on the natural hazards, impact of natural hazards on society. So those are the kind of my research I've worked on recent years.
Finally, Dakshina.
Yes, most of my research is on industrial organization and environmental economics, especially when it comes to environmental economics. I look at environmental justice, energy economics, renewable and non-renewable policies, how they affect and what are the efficacies of these policies. That's what generally I look at it.
Sounds to me, Jan, we've got a wide range of expertise, even just within economics. I can see why they look down on you. They know far more than you do.
I think that's probably fair. And I think the thing that I find interesting about economics is that you take a particular perspective. And of course, it's varied within economics. But I was wondering if you could help our listeners understand, how do economists understand the world? And what kind of question would you ask if you were an economist? Aurelie?
So broadly speaking, I would say that economists study how people make choices, while still considering how these choices are constrained because of limited or scarce resources like time, money, or even information. Also central to economics is the notion of incentives. Incentives matter. They can make people do things that they wouldn't do otherwise. And in economics, we want to understand how people respond to those incentives and how to create those incentives. When it comes to sustainability in business, we'll ask questions like, okay, if resources are scarce, what are the trade-offs between economic growth and environmental sustainability? We also do a lot of cost-benefit analysis. We want to quantify what are the costs and benefits of adopting sustainable practices. And these costs are not just economic costs, but also social and environmental costs. We talk a lot about externalities. How do business account for external costs, which are costs that are not borne directly by businesses, but costs such like pollution, greenhouse gases, or the depletion of natural resources. And how can we design policies or incentives to internalize those costs and change the behavior of businesses? And finally, we also look at questions like innovation, technological changes in businesses, and also consumer behavior, how businesses will respond to consumer awareness about sustainability, for example.
It's interesting, isn't it, Jan, that you maybe think of economists in a similar way that you can be drawn into thinking of accountants, that it's all about numbers. But as Aurelie's just explained there, it's so much more than numbers. There's societal factors, there's environmental factors. There's so much more that goes into all of that.
The desire for several disciplines, and economists and accountants wouldn't be the only ones, to turn things into numbers is to try to get some robustness and some probity. And so you have an intuition that something matters, but how much does it matter? And if you're keen on something, well, how much would you be willing to pay for that? So I suppose at the heart of that is this idea of markets of various sorts as well.
Yes, show me the numbers. That's it. That's it. You want a definitive answer, show me the numbers. So markets then. So a central part of economics. But can you explain what markets are to a layperson like myself who doesn't necessarily deal with economics every day? And where there are markets for sustainability in business, how is that all worked out?
Markets and also what is called market-based policies are very important in economics. Why? So simply put, markets are places where buyers and sellers interact, and the prices is determined by the forces of supply and demand. And markets are important because they facilitate the allocation of resources based on preferences and decisions of buyers and sellers who interact voluntarily and pursue their own self-interest. In other words, the market price will work as a signal and will provide incentives for buyers and sellers to behave in a certain way, and that should lead to an efficient or the best possible allocation of resources. And it doesn't mean that economists believe that markets are perfect. There are several cases where markets fail. And one example is externalities. Take the example of pollution. Pollution is a byproduct of a profitable activities, and because companies do not bear the full consequences of pollution, they will generate too much, and that's clearly a case where markets will fail to deliver the best possible outcome. However, economists still believe that we can use markets or the ideas behind market to create environmental policies. And the idea is that then we put a price on pollution, and this price reflects the environmental cost and the damages of pollution, and this price will work as a price signal and will influence the decisions made by businesses. And in terms of sustainability, an example that I've been working with over the last few years are carbon markets. These are markets where companies can buy or sell carbon credits, which represents the right to emit a certain amount of CO2, for example. And by creating those markets, what we do is that we put a price on CO2 emissions that hopefully, if the price is high enough, will reflect the environmental cost of climate change. And these will create financial incentives for companies to adopt more sustainable business practices or to invest in clean technologies.
Externalities are really important, and I'd like to pick up that and sort of ask some more questions about it. And so I know that the work that you three have done identify that pollution impacts are often borne by communities with lower incomes. And I wonder, why does that happen? And also, what can be done to mean that is less likely to happen in the future? Because clearly it doesn't feel very fair to me, even if, for whatever reason. But I suppose, first of all, why does that happen? And what can be done about it?
So the issue of pollution, disproportionately affecting lower income communities based on, it's kind of complex interplay of socio-economic and political and environmental factors. So here are some reasons why this happens, and then I can tell about some ideas how we can tackle these issues. So the reason is that low-income areas often have less funding for environmental protections and fewer resources to fight against the pollution. And another reason is that these communities usually have less political influences to push for the regulations and policies that protect them from the pollution. Another reason is that the polluting industries are located in or near the low-income areas because land is cheaper in those areas. Land is cheaper to clean, and in case of spill, that there is a less community opposition in those areas. So historically, these areas have been overlooked, and when it comes to environmental regulations and improvements. So, what can we do about it, right? There are some ideas, but not limited to these policies only, and it also depends on the location. And then policymakers may kind of needs to identify what it works for their areas, and then what policies to implement them, and they might have to adjust it. But some of the things that we can do is that we can implement and enforce more stringent environmental laws that protect all communities equally. And another thing we can do is to support local advocacy groups that help residents to have a stronger voices in political and environmental decisions. And then we can also invest in the green infrastructure and the clean industries in low-income areas to boost their local economy and improve the environment. So another idea is that we can raise awareness about environmental issues and provide education on how to reduce pollution and its impacts. So some of the research says that education has a large positive impact on the positive environmental outcomes. So we can also think about in terms of setting up robust system to monitor pollution levels in more vulnerable communities and hold polluters more accountable. And another idea is that we can conduct studies to understand specific health impacts of pollution in low-income areas, and we can use this data to inform the policy decisions. So those are some of the ideas.
They are really impressive potential solutions to the problems, but it may take some time to be implemented. So in the meantime, do we have an understanding of what the long-term implications are of industrial pollution while we're trying to sort out it not being as prevalent as it is at the moment?
Industrial pollution significantly impacts the long-run economic health of affected areas. Here are some of the main implications. So first, let's look at the property values. So if you think about property values, so properties near industrial sites or high pollution areas often lose value due to poor air quality and contaminated water sources and associated health risks with it. And also the polluted areas are less appealing to potential buyers or investors, leading to longer selling times and reduced demand, which further lowers property values in that case. And areas with severe pollution may face stricter zoning laws in limiting residential or commercial development and negatively affecting the property values in that area. Also, if you think about in terms of job opportunities, so pollution can cause health problems for local residents, and it reduces the productivity, and it's going to increase absenteeism. So this can deter business from operating in the areas, which is going to limit the job opportunities. Also, stricter environmental regulations can increase operational costs, or it's going to force the polluting industries to shut down and resulting in job losses in that area as well. And reasons depends on the polluting industries going to find it hard to diversify their economy, leading to economic stagnation or a decline due to lack of different job opportunities in that area. So this leads to questions about economic development in that area. We can think of some of issues with that will be pollution-related health issues leads to higher healthcare costs. So it's going to be straining public resources and reducing disposable income, which is going to negatively impact local businesses and economic growth. And another issue will be cleaning up these polluted areas, and rehabilitating the environment requires significant resources. That means the diverting funds from the other development projects, and it's going to slow the economic progress. And also, poor environmental conditions deter external investments, and investors and businesses avoid areas with high pollution due to potential risk and higher compliances and the health-related costs. So, and last, we can think of another issue is that persistent pollution undermines the long-term sustainability of economic development. So as natural resource becomes depleted or contaminated, the economic base weakens, and it's going to reduce the growth prospects in the area. So by addressing the industrial pollution, communities can improve the property values, job opportunities, and overall economic development, which is going to lead to more healthier and more prosperous future for the economy.
A couple of things strike me off the back of that. One, that it almost seems like a vicious cycle, that things are getting bad, therefore there's less investment, therefore things get worse, therefore there's less investment in that. But also there almost seems to be inbuilt excuses for industry who are doing the pollution. They're saying, well, if we don't do the pollution, we have to abide by these new environmental standards. Sorry, it's going to cost us more money. We're going to have to go and operate somewhere else because we just can't afford to operate here. It seems it's difficult cycles to break as well. You talked about health there, Anita, and I'll come to you, Dakshina. So looking beyond economic implications towards social implications, so like the social costs of industrial pollution, we talk about healthcare expenses, lost productivity. What are all these implications for those poorer communities that are being affected by industrial pollution?
Right. I mean, assessing this impact of industrial pollution can take, it's quite complicated, and it may involve several steps. So generally people have certain ways of doing, economists have certain ways of doing, but first of all, if you think of like stepwise, first you need to identify what kind of pollutant and what kind of areas are affected by these things. And then if you know the source of the pollutant and the source of the ingredient, the chemical product, what kind of health problems you will have, whether it is respiratory illnesses, cardiovascular, or cancer, or so on and so forth. Once you identify these things, what you can do is you can go and calculate the actual healthcare cost, direct and indirect. So what do you mean by direct? Is basically the think of hospital visits, medication and treatment, which is caused directly by the polluting material. Indirect can be the ones you need to have a caregiver to come up with, and also it has to be, you have a transportation cost and other loss of income due to your spouse or somebody else, your partner, helping out to recover. So then comes to about productivity. That's comes into play as well. So how do you measure productivity? There are many ways of measuring. If you ask an economist, some simple ways you can do is like look at the lost work days due to illness, and then you can measure that part. Also consider long-term impacts such as disability or premature deaths affecting this workforce. So how do economic evaluation? If you know these exact causes of these problems, you can put a monetary value on this, how much you're willing to pay and cost of illness methods and so on and so forth. And you can put a monetary value and then estimate the productivity losses based on average wages and average employment data. And then you can factor into the social economic status of the community, recognize how the poor and the communities might face this high exposure and have less access to healthcare. These things are there. So, and then you can look at the economic burden on these communities, accounting for the potential exacerbation of poverty due to illness and expenses and lost income. So it's kind of what you said about vicious cycle. It becomes a kind of vicious cycle. You need to find data. You can use statistical and econometric models to analyze these problems and come up with policies. Now, these policies may differ from community to community and area to area, region to region, and then systematically come up with ways to address these issues.
Is that an important aspect, that it is different in different places, that the data that you're collecting isn't necessarily always the same wherever you go, and therefore the policies that need to be implemented aren't always going to be the same?
So let's take Western world. Most of the countries have pretty much data available. But if you think about, for example, I'm originally from Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka has no data. If we try to do something about Sri Lanka, there is not even income data by the zip code kind of thing. So it becomes a problem. There are no data available, or there is no records available about where the polluting companies are located, even in a country like Sri Lanka. So these things can be quite different from country to country, place to place. Even in UK, I'm sure if we try to do something, it might be quite different.
And I guess even within a country as well, different parts of the UK, different levels of pollution, different levels of issues, different types of regulation, depending on the devolution to Scotland, Wales, etc. You've got It's nice and simple, Jan. It's really straightforward. One rule for everyone, we'll be fine. So then I was wondering then about the trade-offs. You've got environmental protection, but then you've got economic development. The trade-offs between them, being able to have one and the other, how that can balance out, and especially in regions that are reliant on polluting industries for both employment and revenue.
Right. I mean, this is not a simple task. Assessing trade-offs in environmental protection and economic growth is, you have to. So this is where economists sometimes lose the general public. So we try to model it. What will happen if you have a policy? So it's important to understand how this efficacy of policies or whatever it is, right? So we model using econometric or economic models to predict how the changes in environment policies will impact various sectors of the economy, employment or GDP or whatever it is. And then these are long term. So we're talking about dynamic settings. So this is going to take a little bit of more understanding about how to model certain aspects of the economy as the time goes by. And then, then you can evaluate how this if policies or the industrial polluting will affect regional employment, regional growth, communities, health outcomes, so on and so forth. So then you can assign the monetary values into these things and have a look at it. And this will have a distributional effect. People in certain parts of even in Lancaster, Morecambe area, we know south of the river is generally quite expensive land prices. North of the river, maybe because people don't want to cross the bridge, but it becomes quite cheap. So you see, understanding these kind of differences, even in a small area like this, is quite important. And then also you should encourage all stakeholders to be part of the system. And that is how everybody has to make a collective decisions how to work through these things. So basically, employing, these methods, econometrics, and econometrics can help to provide a comprehensive assessment of these trade-offs between environmental and economic growth together. So it's quite complex, and sometimes it works different ways from one to the other.
I'd never considered there was a wrong side of the river to live on in Lancaster before. It makes it sound like that we've got gangland areas. I really don't think we do, but maybe they're there, and Dakshina knows more about this than I do.
Maybe I'm already putting trouble of this whole podcasting.
Half of Lancaster are going to be protesting after this episode, and by the sound of it, it's the half we don't want to be knocking on our doors. I just want to bring up something there that you've mentioned, Dakshina, which is all about the fact you have to use methodologies. And different economists use different methodologies, which obviously could lead to different results. Is this how politics can come into it as well? Because you've got the political side might want to get a certain result, so therefore they might use certain economists who use certain methodologies to back up what they want them to say.
Actually, I didn't want to get into politics, but anyway, since you mentioned it, I mean, we are originally from United States. We studied in the United States. I lived there for 22 years. I mean, I lived in Lubbock, Texas, We used to go to certain areas in Lubbock, West Texas, and try to promote wind energy. I don't think the farmers were very much interested in understanding you can use a wind turbine and trying to, use that to do for water desalination or get, energy. So that part of the green, they didn't care very much about it. But then we decided, okay, we need to sell the wind turbines in a different way. So we said, well, think about it. You have excess energy. You can sell it to the grid, and it might be better off than that. So it's the same wind turbine, but you sell it in a different way. So politics and the ideologies, forget the politics. Just people have different ideologies about green or non-green. So these can be, we were explaining the same wind turbine, but in 2 different years it changed the way we pitch the thing. But now if you go to West Texas, there are a lot of wind turbines, part of Texas Tech when I was working there. So people have different ideology, people have different belief systems. So if you understand these things, you can cater them. That is where everything, set aside the politics, right?
I did ask the politics question with nervous tone to my voice because we have got a general election in the very, very near future, and there are limits to what we can say politically. Dakshina, very well done. No, you didn't get us in any trouble with any kind of broadcasting regulators.
But I also think that what you spoke to there is the fundamental nature of the human condition, that we want to be safe and secure. We need to have economic means to be safe and secure, and if we're thinking about doing something different, particularly maybe as a farmer or a land use, or even as an industrial organisation, we need information. We need a way of grasping what we're talking about, and if it makes sense to pre-existing understandings, then I think people are much more able to understand and move in a green direction. Because money matters, but also other things matter as well. I'm really interested in how you've described there's a diversity of ways that we might deal with industrial pollution and think about that trade-off between environmental protection and economic development. And also that you've got experience all the way from Texas, across various regions of the country, and in Lancaster and the Pentland Centre for Sustainability and Business as well. I was wondering if you could tell us just a few examples of specific policies or regulatory approaches that are effective in mitigating the impact of industrial pollution on communities.
There is no miracle recipe, so whether a specific policy or approach is affecting in mitigating the impact of pollution on those communities will really depend on how they are designed, what are the rules surrounding these approaches, etc. One good example is in fact from the US. It's called the Clean Air Act. One of the goals of this act was to set national air quality standards for key air pollutants like PM2.5. And an interesting feature of this act was that in areas that did not meet the standard, so the most polluted areas basically, states had to develop what was called a state implementation plan involving stringent regulations on polluting industries in those polluted areas. And a recent study just published this year has shown that the Clean Air Act has disproportionately improved air quality in low-income areas. And this is by design, because you have these implementation plans. They are enforced in the most polluted areas, which are also areas with high proportion of low-income people.
Good news. We like good news.
I'm going to be sceptical and ask a question here, though. In regards to that, though, is that because the polluting companies have just gone and moved elsewhere and it's had an economic impact, maybe negatively?
The study doesn't show that, no, there hasn't been a strong negative impact on economic development in those areas. Quite the contrary. House prices have increased, revenues and income have increased as well. So I think overall it was a win-win.
I was naturally sceptical, as you're fully aware.
Yeah, he's always sceptical. And so quite often people say, well, let's tax the externalities, let's tax the pollution. Is that a good policy?
Pollution tax and other incentives policies, as I said, they put a price on pollution. And the central appeal of those policies is what economists call allocative efficiency. It's a fancy word just to say that you provide more flexibilities for companies to achieve an environmental objective, and then that allows them to choose the most profitable ways to reduce pollution, the most profitable clean technologies. At the same time, when you provide this flexibility, you reallocate pollution spatially. And it means that you will harm not necessarily the same people. And by emphasizing allocative efficiency, market-based policies like pollution tax, for example, have raised questions whether they present a specific equity efficiency trade-off. And there I will use some examples. So economists have been interested in that trade-off, and there has been quite a few studies about that. One of them looked at California, where they have a carbon market, putting a price on carbon emissions. And what they have shown is that after introducing that market, air pollution disparities have decreased, so solving these environmental justice concerns. However, looking at Europe, there is an ongoing and still very preliminary research showing that the European carbon market might pose problems from the point of view of environmental justice by increasing air pollution in lower income or most vulnerable areas. One way to avoid that, though, to avoid those concerns, would be that the revenues generated by a pollution tax or by the sale of carbon credits, for example, could be earmarked for environmental protection programs, green infrastructure investments, and in particular in lower income areas where people have been historically more affected by pollution.
And that complexity is really good to play out. Mm-hmm. And I suppose people often get quite cross about flexibility if I'm talking to people about environmental policies or whatever. But a systems science perspective, of which we've had several on the podcast this year, means that it's hard to know what's the right thing to do everywhere and every place. So flexibility in allowing people to choose is maybe quite important. But I really like that idea of hypothecation, that earmarking of a tax for an outcome to actually remedy any odd things that happen in the meantime. So that's a really nice combination of policies.
Why I always think you're strange as an accountant. You accept things that aren't a specific number. Yes. You don't necessarily need it all to add up perfectly to a sum at the end. I think, Jan, we're going to pause things here for a short while. We've had some great discussions there about industrial pollution, the effects on communities, etc. I think what we'll do is we'll bring Aurelie, we'll bring Anita, and we'll bring Dakshina back for another episode to discuss green spending and consumer attitudes towards green spending, just to have a discussion about that separately, because that's another quite big topic and lots more fascinating work to be discussed there. Until then, thank you very much to all three of you.
Thank you.
And we will see you soon on Transforming Tomorrow. I'm Paul Turner.
And I'm Professor Jan Babington.